The rain in West Chicago didn't just fall, it felt like it was trying to erase the city, scrubbing the grime from the streets until everything was just gray water and freezing brick. Claire huddled deeper beneath her rot-scented tarp, shivering as the damp cold gnawed all the way to her bones. For nights behind this dumpster had taught her to sleep through the rumble of trucks and the screech of fighting cats, but it hadn't taught her how to stop feeling invisible. She closed her eyes, trying to imagine warmth, until a sound cut through the drone of the downpour, a sob, broken and terrifyingly young. Her eyes snapped open, and the old instinct, the nurse she used to be, jolted her awake before her brain could catch up. She peered around the rusted edge of the metal bin, squinting against the gloom. There, huddled under the flickering yellow humor of a dying streetlight, was a child. The girl couldn't have been more than 5, shivering in a white designer dress that clung to her like a wet tissue, completely out of place in this alley of forgotten things. Claire rose on unsteady legs, her own hunger momentarily forgotten as she stepped into the rain. The girl looked up, her black curls plastered to her skull, and Claire's breath hitched in her throat. The child's tiny hands were stained with dark, running streaks that didn't look like mud. It was blood, fresh and stark against the pale skin. "Hey there," Claire rasped, keeping her hands visible and open. "You're hurt, aren't you?" The girl didn't run, she just pressed herself harder against the brick wall, her eyes wide with a panic that looked too old for her face. Claire crouched down, ignoring the icy slush soaking through her jeans. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. We need to find a police officer." The reaction was instant. The girl lunged forward and grabbed Claire's wrist with surprising strength. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Papa said never trust the police. Only family." Before Claire could process the chilling warning, the alley was suddenly flooded with blinding white light. The low, predatory growl of engines echoed off the walls as 3 black SUVs turned the corner, moving with the slow menace of sharks in deep water. The girl let out a whimper and buried her face in Claire's tattered jacket. "They're back," she breathed. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized this wasn't just a lost child, this was a hunt, and she had just stepped directly into the crosshairs. The blinding beams of the SUVs cut through the downpour like prison searchlights, sweeping across the wet brick and illuminating the dancing droplets of rain. Claire didn't think, she just reacted, her body moving on a surge of adrenaline that temporarily banished the cold and hunger. She grabbed Elena, pulling the small girl into the narrow, suffocating gap between the dumpster and the rotting wooden fence. The smell of wet cardboard and sour milk was overwhelming, but it was the only cover they had. "Quiet," Claire whispered, her lips brushing the girl's damp curls. "Do not make a sound, Elena. Hold your breath if you have to." Elena buried her face in the crook of Claire's neck, her small body trembling so violently that Claire could feel the vibrations through her own thin layers. The car doors slammed, the sound echoing like gunshots in the enclosed alley. Heavy footsteps splashed through the puddles, purposeful and aggressive. These weren't the shuffling steps of the homeless or the erratic movements of addicts, these were soldiers marching into battle. "Check the perimeter," a voice barked, the tone deep and clipped. "If she is here, she is scared. She won't have gone far." Claire squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her back harder against the slimy wood of the fence. She knew this alley better than she knew the lines on her own face. She knew that 10 feet to her left, behind a stack of discarded pallets, was a hole in the chain-link fence that led to the service yard of the old bakery. It was tight, jagged, and dangerous, but it was a way out. She waited until the heavy footsteps moved toward the mouth of the alley, away from their hiding spot. Now, she breathed. She scooped Elena up, ignoring the protest of her malnourished muscles, and moved low and fast. She slipped behind the pallets, wincing as a splinter tore through her jeans and into her knee, but she didn't stop. She guided Elena through the gap in the fence, shielding the girl's head with her hand to protect her from the rusted metal teeth. They spilled out onto the cracked concrete of the service yard, the rain instantly soaking them again. "We have to run, honey," Claire said, setting the girl down for a second to get a better grip. "Can you run?" Elena nodded, her eyes wide and dark, swallowing the rest of her face. She didn't complain about the cold or the lack of shoes. She simply reached up and took Claire's hand, gripping it with a trust that made Claire's chest ache. They ran. They wove through the labyrinth of West Chicago, sticking to the shadows and the service roads that didn't appear on any tourist map. Claire led them with the instinct of a stray cat, avoiding the main avenues where the streetlights buzzed and police cruisers prowled. Every pair of headlights that flashed against a building made her heart slam against her ribs, but she kept moving, pulling Elena along. The girl was flagging, her small legs struggling to keep up with Claire's desperate pace. By the time the weathered steeple of St. Jude's Church came into view, Claire's lungs were burning. The church wasn't much to look at, just gray stone and stained glass that hadn't been cleaned in decades, but to Claire, it was a fortress. The heavy oak doors were never locked, a policy Father Ollie refused to change despite the neighborhood's decline. Claire pushed the door open, and the smell of frankincense and old candle wax rushed out to meet them, wrapping around them like a warm blanket. She ushered Elena inside and heat the door shut, sliding the heavy iron bolt into place with trembling hands. "Father," Claire called out, her voice cracking. "Father Ollie, I need help." The sanctuary was dim, lit only by the flickering boat of candles near the altar. Footsteps hurried from the vestry, and Father Ollie appeared, his cassock worn and his face lined with worry. He stopped dead when he saw them, Claire, dripping wet and shivering, and the child in the ruined white dress clinging to her leg. "Claire?" The priest rushed forward, his eyes darting to the girl. "Great heavens! Who is this? What has happened?" "I don't know," Claire gasped, sinking onto the nearest pew as her legs finally gave out. "I found her in the alley. There were men in SUVs looking for her. She is hurt, Father. She has blood on her hands." Father Ollie didn't waste time asking more questions. He hurried to the back and returned with a basin of warm water and a stack of clean towels. He knelt before Elena, his movements gentle and practiced. "It is all right, little one," he murmured softly. "You are safe here." Claire took a warm washcloth and gently reached for Elena's hands. The girl flinched at first but then allowed Claire to wipe away the grime. As the warm water dissolved the dark streaks, Claire frowned. She scrubbed harder, expecting to find a deep gash or a jagged cut, but the skin beneath was unbroken. She cleaned the other hand, then checked the girl's arms. There were no cuts. No wounds. Claire looked up at Father Ollie, a chill that had nothing to do with the rain settling in her stomach. "Father," she whispered. "This isn't her blood." The priest stopped his ministrations, his eyes locking with Claire's. The implications hung heavy in the silent church. If the blood wasn't Elena's, then she had been close to someone who had bled a lot. Someone who might not have survived. "Elena," Claire said, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Can you tell us who you belong to? We need to call someone." The girl looked at the basin of pink-tinged water, then up at Claire. "Papa," she whispered. "I want Papa." "Okay," Claire nodded. "Do you know his number?" Elena closed her eyes and took a shaky breath, reciting a string of digits with the rhythm of a prayer she had been forced to memorize. 312. Father Ollie pulled an old flip phone from his pocket and handed it to Claire. He looked grim. "Be careful, Claire. A child like this, she comes from a world that does not ask for permission." Claire stared at the phone. She knew he was right. Calling this number was opening a door she might never be able to close. But then she looked at Elena, shivering in a pew that was too big for her, her eyes haunted by things a 5-year-old should never see. Claire dialed. The ringback tone purred 3 times before the line connected. "Speak." The voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth, sharp as broken glass. It was the voice of a man who expected obedience and delivered consequences. Claire swallowed hard, her throat clicking dryly. I think I found your daughter." The silence on the other end of the line was heavier than a scream. It stretched for 3 seconds, each one an eternity where Claire could hear nothing but the frantic thumping of her own heart against the plastic casing of the old phone. She expected him to shout, to demand answers with the fury of a parent whose child had been stolen, but when the voice returned, it was eerily calm. It was a stillness that promised violence. "Who are you?" the man asked. The tone was low, vibrating with a restrained lethality that made the hair on Claire's arms stand up. "My name is Claire," she managed to say, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to steady it. "I found her in an alley in West Chicago. She was hiding behind a dumpster. She is safe now. We are at St. Jude's Church." There was a pause, followed by the muffled sound of movement on the other end, the rustle of fabric, the click of a car door unlocking. "St. Jude's. On 14th? Yes. Do not leave. Do not let anyone else near her. If she is not there when I arrive." He didn't finish the threat. He didn't have to. The line went dead with a sharp click. Claire slowly lowered the phone, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it onto the table. She looked up at Father Ali, who was watching her with a grim expression, his hands clasped tightly over his rosary. "He is coming," Claire whispered. "God help us," the priest murmured. The wait was agonizing. Claire sat on the edge of the pew next to Elena, who had curled up into a ball beneath a scratchy wool blanket Father Ali had provided. The little girl's breathing had evened out, exhaustion finally winning the war against terror. Claire watched the rise and fall of her small chest, marveling at how fragile she looked. It seemed impossible that this tiny creature was the center of a storm that involved black SUVs and men with guns. Claire ran a hand through her own damp, tangled hair, trying to compose herself. She felt exposed, stripped raw by the night. For months, she had been invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of the city, asking for change, digging through trash, sleeping with one eye open. Now, she had stepped directly into the spotlight of a world she knew nothing about. She looked at her hands, still grimy despite the washcloth, and wondered if she had just signed her own death warrant. "You should go, Father," Claire said softly. "You do not need to be here when they get here." Father Ali shook his head, his jaw set in stubborn lines. "This is God's house, Claire. I will not abandon a child, and I will not abandon you." Exactly 14 minutes later, the atmosphere in the church shifted. It wasn't a sound at first, but a vibration, a low hum that rattled the stained glass in its lead frames. Then came the headlights. Beams of intense, white light swept across the high windows, cutting through the gloom of the sanctuary like lightning. Tires crunched over the gravel outside, not one car, but a fleet. Elena stirred, whimpering in her sleep. Claire placed a hand on the girl's shoulder to soothe her, but her eyes were fixed on the heavy oak doors. The doors didn't just open, they were thrown wide, banging against the stone walls with a hollow boom. The wind and rain swirled in, bringing with it the scent of ozone and wet asphalt. 3 men entered first, their movements precise and synchronized. They wore dark suits that looked tailored to conceal weapons, their eyes scanning the shadows of the nave with predatory efficiency. Then, he walked in. Dominic Moretti did not look like a frantic father. He looked like a warlord surveying a conquered city. He was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a black wool coat that was soaked across the shoulders. His hair was dark, cut short and severe, framing a face that could have been carved from granite. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from Claire's lungs. They were gray, the color of a winter sky before a blizzard, and they were absolutely terrifying. He stopped in the center of the aisle, the water dripping from his coat pooling on the ancient stone floor. He ignored Father Ali completely. His gaze locked onto Claire, dissecting her in a single second, her tattered clothes, her hollow cheeks, her protective posture over the bundle of blankets on the pew. "Where is she?" His voice was a low growl that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Claire stood up, her legs feeling like they were made of water, but she didn't step back. She pointed to the pew behind her. "She is sleeping. Please, don't wake her abruptly. She is terrified." Dominic moved. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, the menacing aura rolling off him in waves. Claire braced herself, half expecting him to strike her, to push her aside as if she were nothing more than debris. But he stopped inches from her, his presence overwhelming. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and cold metal. He looked past her, down at the sleeping child. The transformation was instantaneous and shattering. The granite mask crumbled. The lethal tension in his shoulders collapsed. He sank to his knees on the dirty stone floor, heedless of his expensive suit, and reached out a hand that trembled visibly. He brushed a damp curl away from Elena's forehead, his touch so gentle it looked like he was handling spun glass. Elena, he choked out, the name sounding like a prayer. The little girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a heartbeat, there was confusion, then recognition. Her face crumpled. "Papa? I'm here, Tesoro. I'm here." Dominic scooped her up, burying his face in her neck, rocking her back and forth. A sound escaped him, half sob, half sigh, that was so raw, so deeply human, that Claire felt like an intruder witnessing it. The men standing guard by the door turned their backs, giving their boss a moment of privacy. Claire stepped back, leaning against the pew for support. Seeing the devil of Chicago on his knees, clutching his child, twisted something inside her chest. She had expected a monster. She had found a man in agony. After a long moment, Dominic stood up, lifting Elena effortlessly in his arms. She clung to him like a limpet, her face buried in his coat. He turned his attention back to Claire. The gray eyes were dry now, but the ice was gone, replaced by an intensity that burned. He looked at her hands, still red from the cold, and then at the scrape on her cheek from the alley. "You are the one who called." "Yes," Claire whispered. "The man who took her," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register again. "Did you see them?" "I saw their cars. SUVs. 3 of them. They were hunting her in the alley. I knew the side streets. I got her out before they could corner us." Dominic stared at her, processing this. He looked at the fragile woman in front of him, starving, shivering, wearing shoes that were falling apart, and realized she had outmaneuvered a hit squad to save his life's blood. "You saved her," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of a verdict. "She was alone," Claire said simply. "I couldn't leave her." Dominic shifted Elena's weight to one arm and reached into his coat pocket. For a terrifying second, Claire thought he was reaching for a weapon, but he pulled out a sleek black phone. He typed a quick message, then looked back at her. "We are leaving," he announced. Claire nodded, feeling a strange hollowness open up inside her. Her part was done. She had been the bridge, and now she would go back to being the dust under the bridge. "Okay. I'm glad she is safe." Dominic took a step toward the door, then stopped. He turned back, his brow furrowed as if he were looking at a puzzle piece that didn't fit. He looked at the rain lashing against the open doors, then back at Claire, who was wrapping her thin arms around herself, preparing for the cold that awaited her once the adrenaline faded. "You are coming with us," he said. Claire blinked. "What?" "She won't let go of my coat," Dominic said, nodding at his daughter, whose small hand was gripping his lapel so tight her knuckles were white. "And she is looking at you. If I walk out that door without you, she will scream." I can't," Claire stammered. "I don't belong in your world. I just wanted to help." Dominic stepped closer, invading her space again. The sheer force of his will was suffocating. "You are right. You don't belong in my world. But you are in it now. Those men saw you. They know someone helped her. If I leave you here, you will be dead by morning." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Father Ali, but the priest just nodded slowly, a silent confirmation of the danger she was in. "Get in the car," Dominic commanded. It wasn't an offer. It was an order from a king to a peasant. "I owe you a debt, Claire. And I did not leave debts unpaid." The drive to the Moretti estate felt less like a journey home and more like a transportation to a high-security prison facility, albeit one wrapped in velvet and steel. Claire sat in the back of the SUV, pressed against the door, trying to make herself as small as possible. The leather seat was soft, smelling of new car and old money, a stark contrast to the damp, rot-scented clothes clinging to her skin. Beside her, Elena slept fitfully in her car seat, her small hand still gripping the edge of Claire's jacket, even in her dreams refusing to let go of the one person who had promised her safety. When the car finally slowed, Claire peered out the tinted window. Iron gates, easily 20 feet high and topped with menacing spikes, swung open silently. Beyond them lay a winding driveway flanked by trees that looked like skeletal sentinels in the rain. The mansion itself was a monolith of gray stone, looming against the night sky. It was massive, beautiful in a brutalist, architectural sense, but completely devoid of warmth. There were no tricycles on the lawn, no welcoming lights in the windows, just dark glass and the blinking red eyes of security cameras. Dominic didn't wait for a chauffeur to open his door. He was out before the vehicle came to a complete halt, unbuckling Elena with a tenderness that belied the violence Claire had seen in his eyes at the church. He carried his daughter toward the massive double doors, leaving Claire to scramble out and follow, flanked by two stone-faced guards who looked at her like she was a stain on the driveway. Inside, the house was even colder. The foyer was a cavern of black marble and white walls, the air conditioning set to a temperature that made Claire's teeth chatter. It was silent. Not the peaceful silence of a library, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a mausoleum. Dominic handed the sleeping child to a waiting woman in a gray uniform, the nanny, presumably, and watched her ascend the sweeping staircase until they were out of sight. Then, the father vanished, and the boss returned. "Follow me," Dominic said, not bothering to look back. He led her down a long corridor lined with oil paintings of stormy seas and unsmiling ancestors, finally opening the door to a library that smelled of mahogany and scotch. He walked behind a massive desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a checkbook. The sound of his pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room. He tore the check loose and slid it across the polished wood toward her. $10,000, Dominic stated, his voice flat. "That is enough to get you off the streets. Get a specialized apartment, buy new clothes, start over. My driver will take you wherever you want to go." Claire stared at the slip of paper. The number was dizzying. It was more money than she had seen in 5 years. It meant hot showers, food that didn't come from a bin, and safety. It was a golden ticket out of hell. But then she thought of Elena's hand gripping her jacket. She thought of the terror in the girl's eyes when she mentioned the police. She thought of the cold, empty hallway outside and the sterile silence of this fortress. "No," Claire said. The word was quiet, but it rang clear in the large room. Dominic froze, his hand halfway to the crystal decanter of whiskey. He looked up, his gray eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Claire repeated, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. "I don't want your money." Dominic straightened, his expression hardening into something dangerous. "You are homeless. You are starving. Do not play games with me, Claire. Everyone has a price. If 10 is not enough, tell me what is." "It's not about the price," Claire said, stepping closer to the desk, ignoring the intimidation radiating off him. "Elena is terrified. She just escaped a nightmare, and you brought her back to a museum. She doesn't know you right now, Dominic. I saw the way she looked at you. She loves you, but she's scared. If she wakes up and I'm gone, and she's alone in this cold house with guards and strangers, she will break." Dominic slammed his hand down on the desk, the sound like a gunshot. "I am her father. I am not a stranger." "You are a stranger to her trauma," Claire fired back, the nurse in her taking override the fear of the mobster. "I was there in the alley. I was the one who told her she was safe. She trusts me. You can't just buy that kind of trust, and you can't transfer it like a bank balance." Silence stretched between them, thick and volatile. Dominic stared at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly. For a moment, Claire thought he might call his guards to drag her out, or worse. He looked at her not as a woman, but as a variable he hadn't accounted for, a variable that was challenging his absolute control. Finally, the tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. He picked up the glass of whiskey and downed it in one swallow, the liquid burning his throat. He knew she was right. He had seen the way Elena clung to this ragged woman. He had felt the distance in his daughter's embrace, the hesitation. "Fine," Dominic growled, turning his back to her to look into the empty fireplace. "You stay. But this is not a charity, and you are not a guest. You are here to ensure my daughter transitions back to her life. That is all." He turned back, pointing a finger at her. "There are rules. You do not leave the grounds. You do not speak to my men. And you never, ever ask me about my business. What happens outside these walls does not concern you. If you break these rules, you will be out on the street before you can blink. Do we have an agreement?" Claire nodded, clutching her thin arms around herself. "I'm just here for Elena." Dominic pressed a button on his desk phone. "Mrs. Hardwick. Come to the library." A moment later, the heavy doors opened, and a woman stepped in who looked like she was made of the same gray stone as the house. Mrs. Hardwick was in her 60s, wearing a severe black dress, her silver hair pulled back into a bun so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and an expression of permanent disapproval. "Sir?" Mrs. Hardwick asked, her voice crisp. "This is Claire," Dominic said, gesturing vaguely at her filth-stained form. "She will be staying with us for the time being to assist with Elena. Get her cleaned up. Burn those clothes. And find her a room in the east wing, near the nursery." Mrs. Hardwick's eyes swept over Claire, taking in the mud-caked boots, the matted hair, and the smell of the alley. Her lip curled slightly, a microscopic display of judgment. "Very well, sir. Though I imagine the guest linens will need significant bleaching afterward." "Just do it," Dominic dismissed them, sitting down and opening a file, effectively erasing Claire from the room. "Come with me," Mrs. Hardwick commanded, turning on her heel. Claire followed the housekeeper out of the library and back into the cold expanse of the hallway. She felt small, dirty, and completely out of her depth. She had just negotiated a deal with the devil to live in his fortress, guarding an innocent soul while surrounded by wolves. As she walked up the marble staircase, leaving dirty footprints on the pristine white runner, Claire realized she had traded the dangers of the street for a danger far more complex. She was safe from the cold rain, but inside the fortress of silence, she was entirely alone. The transformation of the Moretti estate didn't happen with a bang, but with a series of quiet, stubborn rebellions. For the first week, the house remained a tomb of gray stone and silence, governed by Mrs. Hardwick's rigid schedule and Dominic's brooding absence. But Claire wasn't built for silence. She had spent too many months invisible on the streets to tolerate being a ghost in a mansion. It started with the curtains. In the great room, heavy velvet drapes blocked out the sun, presumably to protect the antique rugs, but Claire pulled them open one Tuesday morning, letting the pale Chicago sunlight flood the dust motes dancing in the air. Then came the music. She found an old radio in the kitchen and tuned it to a jazz station, filling the sterile hallways with saxophone and brass. And finally, there was the laughter. Elena, who had been a mute shadow upon their arrival, began to giggle as Claire chased her through the garden, pretending to be a tickle monster. Dominic observed it all from the periphery, like a hawk circling a field that had suddenly bloomed flowers. Claire would catch him watching from the mezzanine, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He looked confused, perhaps even annoyed, as if the light she was letting in hurt his eyes. But he never told her to stop. By the second week, however, the domestic softness wasn't enough to quell the restlessness brewing inside Claire. Her body remembered the alley. It remembered the feeling of helplessness when the SUVs arrived, the terrifying reality that her survival depended entirely on luck. She needed to feel strong again. Late one afternoon, while Elena was napping, Claire wandered down to the basement gym. It was a cavernous space smelling of rubber, iron, and stale sweat. A heavy punching bag hung in the corner, swaying slightly from the draft of the air conditioning. Claire wrapped her hands in spare tape she found on a shelf, mimicking what she'd seen in movies, and approached the bag. She threw a punch. Her wrist buckled, sending a sharp jolt of pain up her forearm. She hissed but didn't stop. She threw another, then another, fueled by a cocktail of anger and fear. She hit the bag for every night she'd slept in the rain, for every person who had looked through her, for the terror in Elena's eyes. She flailed up the leather, panting, sweating, her form messy and desperate. "You are going to break your wrist before you bruise the bag." Claire spun around, gasping. Dominic stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He watched her with that same intense, dissecting gaze he used on everyone. "I know what I'm doing," Claire lied, cradling her aching hand. "No, you don't," Dominic said, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward her. The air in the room seemed to contract, charged by his proximity. "You are punching with your anger, not your body." "Anger is useful, Claire, but without technique, it is just self-destruction." He stopped behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Stance," he commanded softly. Claire hesitated, then widened her feet. "Wider," Dominic murmured. He didn't ask permission. He placed his large hands on her hips and adjusted her, grounding her. His touch was firm, professional, yet it sent a shockwave through her that had nothing to do with combat. "Power comes from the legs, not the arms. Rotate your hip into it." He moved one hand to her shoulder, correcting her posture, then down to her arm. "Tuck your thumb. Never wrap it inside your fingers. That is how you break it." Claire swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was surrounding her, his chest brushing her back, his voice a low rumble in her ear. It was intimate and dangerous all at once. "Now," Dominic whispered. "Strike." Claire pivoted, driving her hip forward as he'd shown her, and connected with the bag. A solid thwack echoed through the room. It felt different this time. Heavy. Grounded. "Better," Dominic said. He didn't step away. Again. For the next hour, he drilled her. He was a relentless teacher, stripping away her frantic energy and replacing it with cold precision. By the time they finished, Claire was dripping with sweat, her muscles burning, but she felt a strange, vibrating power in her limbs. She collapsed onto the bench, drinking from a water bottle, while Dominic unwrapped his own hands. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked, wiping her forehead. Dominic looked at her, his gray eyes dark. "Because the world is not kind, Claire. You saved my daughter with your wits, but next time, you might need your hands." He paused, his gaze dropping to her bruised knuckles. "You are not weak because you are kind. But kindness needs teeth to survive in my world." That night, the house felt too quiet again. Claire couldn't sleep. The adrenaline from the training session had faded into a dull ache, and the ghosts of her past were loud in the silence. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out onto the wide stone balcony that overlooked the estate grounds. The rain had returned, a soft drizzle that misted the air. To her surprise, she wasn't alone. Dominic was sitting in a wicker chair in the corner, a glass of amber liquid resting on his knee. He didn't look up as she approached. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No," Claire said, leaning against the stone railing. "The quiet is loud." Dominic let out a dry huff of laughter. "Yes. It is." He gestured to the empty chair beside him and poured a second glass from the bottle on the table. "Sit." Claire sat. The whiskey burned pleasantly going down, warming the chill in her chest. For a long time, they just watched the rain, two insomniacs hiding from their own thoughts. "Mrs. Hardwick told me about your wife," Claire said softly, breaking the silence. It was a risk, breaking his rule about asking questions, but the whiskey made her brave. "She said this house used to be different when she was alive." Dominic swirled his glass, staring into the vortex of the liquid. "Lillian hated the rain," he said, his voice distant. "She hated this house too," She called it a mausoleum. She wanted to move to the coast, somewhere with sun and salt air. I kept promising her we would go. Just one more deal, I told her. Just one more year. He looked up, his eyes meeting Claire's, raw with a grief that hadn't healed in 3 years. She took a bullet meant for me, Claire. In a restaurant parking lot. She died because I couldn't leave the life, and the life decided to take her instead. Claire felt a lump form in her throat. My brother, Caleb, she whispered. He was 9. Our mother locked us in the apartment while she went out to score. There was a fire. An electrical short in the wall. I was at the store buying milk. By the time I got back, she stopped, the memory of the smoke and the sirens choking her. I was the big sister. I was supposed to protect him. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the windows blow out. I never went back inside. That was the night I started sleeping on the streets. Dominic reached out across the small table. He didn't take her hand, but he covered it with his own, a gesture of solidarity. His skin was rough, calloused from violence, but his touch was anchoring. We are just 2 people standing in the wreckage, Dominic murmured. Trying to keep the fires from starting again. Claire turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. It was a breach of protocol, a crossing of the line between employer and employee, between the boss and the stray. But Dominic didn't pull away. He held on, his grip tight, as if she were the only thing keeping him from drifting off into the dark. I'm glad you are here, Claire, he said, his voice rough. The house, it isn't so quiet when you are in it. Claire looked at him, seeing the cracks in the armor, the man beneath the monster. I'm not going anywhere, Dominic. The weeks that followed the night on the balcony were defined by a softness that felt dangerous in its fragility. The Moretti estate, once a cold fortress of stone and silence, began to breathe. It wasn't just the curtains Claire had opened or the jazz music that now drifted through the halls, it was the way the air itself seemed to settle. The tension that had vibrated in the walls since the day she arrived was replaced by a quiet, rhythmic domesticity that felt terrifyingly like a home. One rainy Tuesday evening, the change was undeniable. They were in the library, a room that had previously been Dominic's solitary command center. Now, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the Persian rugs. Elena was sprawled on the floor, coloring in a sketchbook with intense concentration, while Claire sat in the oversized leather armchair reading aloud. Dominic was at his desk, ostensibly working, but Claire noticed that he hadn't turned a page of his file in 20 minutes. He was watching them. Claire lowered the book, catching his gaze. For a second, his guard was completely down. He wasn't looking at them with the calculation of a crime lord assessing a threat. He was looking at them with the hunger of a starving man sitting before a feast he didn't dare touch. In that quiet exchange, an invisible thread pulled tight between them, humming with a frequency that made Claire's breath hitch. They looked like a family. And that, she realized with a jolt, was the most dangerous thing they could be. Papa, Elena chirped, holding up her drawing. Look. It's us. Dominic stood up, moving around the desk with a hesitation that was painful to watch. He took the paper from his daughter. It was a crude crayon drawing of 3 stick figures standing under a giant yellow sun. One was small, one was tall and black, and the other, drawn in bright blue, was holding the small one's hand. It is beautiful, Tesoro, Dominic said, his voice thick. He glanced at Claire, the blue figure, and his expression shuddered. The warmth vanished, replaced by a wall of ice so sudden it made the room feel 10 degrees colder. He placed the drawing on the desk, face down. It is late. You should be in bed. But, Elena started. Bed, Dominic ordered, his tone clipping the end of the sentence. Mrs. Hardwick will take you. He rang the bell, and the housekeeper appeared moments later to whisk a confused Elena away. When the door clicked shut, leaving Claire and Dominic alone, the silence that descended wasn't comfortable anymore. It was heavy, suffocating. You need to leave, Dominic said. He didn't look at her. He was staring into the fire, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. Claire blinked, stunned by the sudden whiplash. "What?" "You have done what you came to do," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Elena is eating. She is sleeping. She is talking again. You have stabilized her. Your job is finished." "My job?" Claire stood up, the book sliding from her lap to the floor. "Is that what this is to you? A job? I thought we were past that." Dominic turned to face her, and a look in his eyes was devastating. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Pure, unadulterated terror masked his cruelty. "Do not mistake my gratitude for familiarity, Claire. You are a guest. A paid employee. And now, you are a liability." "A liability?" Claire stepped closer, ignoring the warning sirens in her head. "How am I a liability? Because I make you laugh? Because I make your daughter happy? Because you make me weak?" Dominic roared. The sound shattered the quiet of the library. He paced toward her, his composure cracking. "Look at this room, Claire. Look at us. We are playing house in a war zone. Do you think the men outside these gates care that we are reading stories by the fire? Do you think my enemies care that I am trying to be a good father?" He stopped inches from her, looming over her, trying to use his size to intimidate her into retreating. "When I look at you, I don't see a nurse. I see a target. I see a weakness that someone will exploit to tear me apart. I cannot afford to care about you. I cannot afford to worry if you are safe. You have to go. Take the money. Take double. Just go." Claire didn't flinch. She didn't back down. The weeks of training in the gym, the nights spent surviving in the alley, they had forged her into something steelier than he gave her credit for. She reached out and placed her hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was hammering against his ribs, betraying his calm exterior. "I am not Lillian," she said softly. Dominic flinched as if she had slapped him. "Don't say her name." "I will say it," Claire insisted, her eyes locking onto his stormy gray ones. "You are pushing me away because you think you are poison. You think that everyone you love ends up in a box. But I am not her, Dominic. I am not a civilian who doesn't know the score. You found me in the dirt. I know what the dark looks like. You have no idea," he rasped, grabbing her wrist, though his grip wasn't painful. It was desperate. "You think you know darkness because you were hungry? Because you were cold? My darkness is blood, Claire. It is lead and fire and decisions that rot your soul. If you stay here, that darkness will touch you. It will stain you." "Let it," Claire challenged him. She took a step closer, eliminating the space between them completely. She could smell the scotch on his breath, feel the heat radiating from his body. "I am not afraid of your world, Dominic. I am afraid of a world without this. Without you. Without Elena. That is the only darkness that scares me now." Dominic stared down at her, his resistance crumbling like a dam under the weight of a flood. He looked at her mouth, then back to her eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation. He found none. "You are a fool," he whispered, but the words lacked any bite. They sounded like a confession. "Maybe," Claire whispered back. "But I'm your fool." Dominic let out a ragged breath and lowered his head. His hand moved from her wrist to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. The air in the room grew thick, charged with a magnetic pull that made everything else fade away. The fire, the rain outside, the guards at the gate, it all ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his hand on her skin and the promise of a collision that had been inevitable since the moment he walked into St. Jude's Church. He leaned in, his eyes drifting shut. Claire rose on her tiptoes, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tilted her head, parting her lips, ready to meet him, ready to cross the line from which there was no return. His breath brushed her lips, warm and intoxicating. Brrrring. The shrill, mechanical ring of the secure line on his desk cut through the moment like a serrated knife. Dominic froze. For a second, he didn't move, his forehead resting against hers, his eyes squeezed shut in frustration. Then, with a heavy sigh, he pulled back. The cold air rushed into the space between them, leaving Claire feeling exposed and shivering. The spell was broken. The warlord was back. Dominic walked to the desk and snatched the receiver. What? Claire watched his back stiffen. His posture shifted instantly from the tender lover to the ruthless commander. He listened for a moment, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone. When, he demanded. Pause. Cut the feeds. Lockdown protocol. Now. He slammed the phone down and turned to face Claire. All the warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a terrified urgency that chilled her to the bone. Go to Elena's room, he ordered, pulling a handgun from the locked drawer of his desk. He checked the chamber with a fluid, practiced motion. Get her into the wardrobe. Do not make a sound. Dominic? Claire asked, her voice trembling. What is happening? We have a breach, he said, moving toward the door. They are inside the perimeter. Go, Claire. Run. Claire didn't think, she moved. The command from Dominic had bypassed her conscious brain and wired itself directly into her muscles. She sprinted out of the library, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind her, sealing Dominic inside with the phone and the impending violence. The hallway, usually a gallery of silent portraits and soft carpets, now felt like the throat of a beast waiting to swallow her whole. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the house into a suffocating darkness broken only by the strobe light flashes of lightning from the storm outside. She ran toward the east wing, her bare feet making no sound on the runner. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun, every creak of the floorboards sounded like a boot step. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that drowned out the distant sound of breaking glass coming from the ground floor. They were in. The fortress had been breached. Claire burst into the nursery, her chest heaving. The room was illuminated by the pale, ghostly glow of a nightlight that ran on battery backup. Elena was sitting up in bed, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes wide pools of ink in the gloom. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask where her papa was, but Claire was already there, pressing a finger to her lips. Shoo, Claire hissed, the sound barely audible over the thunder rolling outside. We have to play a game, Elena. Right now. Just like in the alley. Elena nodded, though her bottom lip trembled. She understood the game. It was the game of survival, the only game she had known for too long. Claire scooped the child up, blankets and all, and carried her to the massive antique wardrobe in the corner of the room. It was made of solid walnut, thick enough to stop a stray bullet, smelling of cedar and lavender sachets. Claire opened the doors and set Elena down in the back, behind a row of winter coats. Stay here, Claire whispered, gripping the girl's shoulders. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steel. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you do not make a sound. You do not come out until Papa or I open this door. Do you understand? Yes, Elena breathed, pulling her knees to her chest. Claire closed the wardrobe doors, leaving only a hairline crack for air. She stepped back, her eyes scanning the room for a weapon. There was nothing. A hairbrush. A porcelain lamp. A heavy book. She grabbed the lamp, ripping the cord from the wall, and retreated into the shadows behind the door. Then, she waited. Time distorted. Seconds stretched into hours. Downstairs, the muffled sounds of chaos erupted, shouts, the heavy thud of bodies hitting walls, the distinct, terrifying pop of gunfire. Dominic was fighting. He was down there, alone, holding back a tide of violence to buy them time. The thought made Claire's stomach twist, but she forced herself to breathe. Stance, his voice whispered in her memory. Power comes from the legs. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. They were not the measured, elegant strides of Dominic Moretti. These were heavy, chaotic, the steps of men who were hunting. Claire tightened her grip on the ceramic base of the lamp, her knuckles turning white. The footsteps moved down the hall, pausing at doors. A crash came from her bedroom. They were checking rooms. Clearing the floor. The footsteps stopped outside the nursery door. The handle turned slowly. The latch clicked. The door swung open, and a silhouette filled the frame. He was huge, dressed in tactical black gear, wearing a balaclava that hid everything but his eyes. He stepped into the room, his weapon, a suppressed pistol, sweeping the space. He didn't see Claire in the corner. His gaze went straight to the bed. "Clear," he muttered into a radio on his shoulder, his voice rough. Checking the closet. He took a step toward the wardrobe. Toward Elena. The world narrowed down to a single point of focus. The fear that had been paralyzing Claire evaporated, replaced by a cold, primal rage. She wasn't a nurse anymore. She wasn't a homeless woman. She was a predator protecting her young. Claire lunged. She didn't scream. She didn't give him a warning. She swung the heavy porcelain lamp with every ounce of strength in her body, putting her hip into the motion just as Dominic had taught her. The base connected with the side of the man's head with a sickening crunch. The man grunted, stumbling sideways, his gun skittering across the floor. But he didn't go down. He was massive, built like a tank, and the blow that would have knocked out a normal man only stunned him. He shook his head, roaring in anger, and turned on her. "You be *TCH. He backhanded her. The blow caught Claire across the jaw, sending her flying backward. She hit the wall hard, her vision swimming with stars, the taste of copper filling her mouth. She slid to the floor, gasping for air. The man loomed over her, pulling a knife from his belt. The blade glinted in the lightning flash. "I'm going to get you," he snarled. Claire scrambled back, her heels digging into the carpet, but there was nowhere to go. Her hand brushed against something cold and hard under the vanity table. The gun. The man lunged, the knife coming down in a vicious arc. Claire rolled, grabbing the pistol. She didn't have time to aim. She didn't have time to think about the morality of what she was doing. She just shoved the barrel upward, into the mass of black fabric and muscle descending on her, and pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap in the small room. The man froze. The knife fell from his hand, clattering harmlessly onto the floor. He looked down at his chest, a look of profound confusion on his face, before his knees buckled. He collapsed heavily, landing inches from Claire's legs. Silence rushed back into the room, ringing in Claire's ears. She lay there, panting, the gun still gripped tightly in her hand. The smell of gunpowder and blood was thick, choking her. She looked at the body. The chest wasn't moving. She had killed him. A sob clawed its way up her throat, but she swallowed it down. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the dizziness, and pointed the gun at the open door. Her hands were shaking so bad the barrel was vibrating. "Claire!" The shout came from the hallway. A second later, Dominic burst into the room. He looked like he had walked through hell. His white shirt was torn and soaked in blood, some of it his, most of it not. He had a gun in one hand and a knife in the other. He scanned the room, his eyes wild, frantic, until they landed on her. He saw the body on the floor. He saw the shattered lamp. And he saw Claire, standing with her feet wide, the gun raised, blood trickling from her lip. "Claire," he breathed, lowering his weapon. He crossed the room in 2 strides, but he didn't grab her. He stopped, looking at her with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even relief. It was awe. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "No," Claire whispered. She looked at the gun in her hand as if realizing for the first time that she was holding it. She let it drop to the carpet. He was going for the wardrobe. He was going for Elena. Dominic stepped over the dead man and pulled her into him. He wrapped his arms around her so tightly it knocked the wind out of her, burying his face in her hair. He was shaking. The invincible crime lord, the man who made Chicago tremble, was shaking. "I thought I lost you," he murmured into her hair. "I heard the shot. I thought." "I'm here," Claire said, her face pressed against his ruined shirt, smelling the iron scent of blood and the musk of his cologne. "I'm still here." A small creak came from the corner of the room. The wardrobe door pushed open. "Miss Claire?" Elena's tiny voice wavered in the darkness. "Is the game over?" Dominic pulled back from Claire, though he kept one arm firmly around her waist. He wiped a smudge of blood from his cheek with his shoulder and turned to his daughter. "Yes, Tesoro," Dominic said, his voice breaking. "The game is over. You can come out now." Elena crawled out, clutching her bear. She looked at the broken lamp, then at the man on the floor. She didn't scream. She walked over to them, stepping around the debris, and wrapped her small arms around Claire's legs, burying her face in Claire's skirt. "You promised," Elena whispered. Claire dropped to her knees, wincing as her bruised body protested, and gathered the child into her arms. She looked up at Dominic over Elena's head. His eyes were locked on hers, dark and intense. "Is it safe?" Claire asked. "Yes," Dominic said. "The others are dealt with. It is over." He reached down, helping them both to their feet. He didn't let go of Claire's hand. He held it tightly, his fingers interlacing with hers, his grip bruising. He looked at the dead man one last time, then back at Claire. "You saved her again," he said quietly. "I told you," Claire said, wiping the blood from her lip with the back of her hand, her eyes flashing with a new, dangerous light. "I am not afraid of the dark." Dominic nodded slowly. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing the bruised knuckles that had shattered the lamp. "I know. And now, the dark knows to be afraid of you." The morning sun didn't just rise, it exploded over the horizon, painting the gray stone of the Moretti estate in hues of gold and apricot. It was a stark contrast to the storm that had raged only hours before, a cool beauty that felt almost mocking. Claire stood in the master bathroom, the water running scalding hot over her hands. She scrubbed at her skin with a bar of lavender soap, watching the suds swirl down the drain. There was no blood left, she had washed that away hours ago, but she could still feel the phantom weight of the gun, the recoil that had traveled up her arm and settled in her marrow. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was paler, her look swollen and purple, a bruise blooming along her jawline like a dark flower. But the eyes were different. The fear that had haunted them for months, the hollow look of someone waiting for the next blow, was gone. In its place was something harder, quieter. A steel spine forged in fire. She turned off the tap, the silence of the room ringing in her ears, until the door creaked open. Dominic stood there. He had showered and changed into fresh clothes, a simple black t-shirt and jeans, stripped of the armor of his suits. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes etched deep by adrenaline and relief, but when he looked at her, his gaze was as warm as the morning light. He didn't say a word. He simply walked over, took a soft towel from the rack, and gently dried her hands. "I killed a man," Claire whispered, the confession hanging heavy in the steam-filled air. "I used to save lives. That was who I was. Now, I don't know who I am." Dominic tossed the towel aside and took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over her bruised jaw with infinite care. "You are the woman who stood between a monster and my daughter," he said, his voice fierce and low. "You didn't lose your humanity, Claire. You found your strength. There is a difference." "I thought I would feel guilty," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I don't. I just feel relieved." "That is because you fought for love, not hate," Dominic said. He leaned his forehead against hers. "I offered you money once to leave. I told you that you were a liability. I was wrong. You are the only thing holding this house together. Please, don't go. Stay here. Not as a guest. Not as a nanny. Stay as my partner. Stay as my family." Claire looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability he hid from the rest of the world. I'm not going anywhere, Dominic. I'm already home. 6 months later. The park was alive with the sound of rustling leaves and distant laughter. It was a perfect spring day, the kind where the air smelled of wet earth and blooming lilacs. Dominic Moretti, the man who made grown men tremble, sat on a plaid blanket in the middle of the grass. His expensive Italian shoes were kicked off a few feet away, and his bare feet were digging into the earth. He looked younger, lighter, the perpetual shadow that hung over him finally lifted by the sun. Claire sat beside him, leaning back on her hands, watching a small figure darting between the oak trees. Elena was laughing, a pure, uninhibited sound that rose into the sky like a bird. She was chasing a yellow butterfly, her dark curls bouncing with every step, the trauma of the alley a distant memory that no longer defined her. She looks happy, Claire said softly. Dominic reached over and interlaced his fingers with hers. She is happy. We all are. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing the ring that now sat on her finger, a simple band of diamonds that caught the light. I never thought I would have this. I thought my life was just survival until the end. You gave me this, Claire. We gave it to each other, Claire corrected him, squeezing his hand. Elena stopped running and looked back at them. She stood framed by the sunlight, her chest heaving, her smile wide and missing a front tooth. She didn't look like a victim. She didn't look like a mafia princess. She just looked like a child who knew she was loved. She ran back toward them, collapsing into the space between them, pulling their arms around her like a protective wall. What is it, Tesoro? Dominic asked, brushing a leaf from her hair. Elena looked from her father to Claire, her eyes shining. This is the good dream, she whispered. The one where the bad men never come back. Claire felt tears prick her eyes, but she smiled, leaning her head on Dominic's shoulder as he pulled them both close. Yes, baby, Claire whispered. This is the good dream. And we never have to wake up. This story isn't just about a billionaire crime lord or a homeless nurse. It is a reminder that sometimes, the people who save us aren't the ones in shining armor, but the ones who are broken in the same places we are. It teaches us that family isn't always about blood, it's about who is willing to stand in the rain with you when everyone else has run for cover. Dominic and Claire found each other in the dark, but they built a life in the light, proving that no past is too heavy to leave behind if you have the right person holding your hand. Thank you so much for journeying with us through the rain and the fire. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in second chances, please consider subscribing to our channel, Sunni Romance. We have so many more stories to tell, and we want you to be part of our community. And before you go, I have to ask, have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to choose between being safe and being brave? Did you take the risk? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one, and we love hearing your stories. Until next time, keep believing in the good dream.